Unlucky 13th for Rocketlabs, stumbling at the last hurdle in getting to orbit. I'm Matt Miller. You're watching Trekzone, and this is a Talkin' Science Story of the Week.
With the latest science and space news 5 days a week across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube. This is Talkin' Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
Alrighty, Brad, our last story of the week for this week. Rocketlabs, the California-based company, performed the most rapid turnaround between launches with its Electron satellite. Unfortunately, Flight 13 has proven to be a bit unlucky.
Yeah, look, it was heartbreaking over the weekend to see, as you said, they had the quick turnaround. They actually moved up the launch window a tad because of just, ideal weather. And, they did all their normal checks, as you always do. Everything was go. The early part of the launch was fine. A few minutes into the launch, especially as they're entering that second stage, they did experience anomaly. And if people were watching a replay of the video recorded, the video freezes out. And then a minute later, you kind of hear the critical parts. And surprisingly, the critical part is, it didn't blow up. That doesn't really happen as much as you think. It's, we're losing speed. As soon as you start to lose speed, you don't have extra fuel, the energy you need, the escape velocity, all of that stuff just dramatically changes. And you're talking about fractions of a second that if it doesn't go right, you don't reach orbit. And that's eventually what we saw, and it unfortunately came back to Earth not in the way everyone wanted.
And Rocketlabs is an interesting one for us here in Australia because they're launching from a launch complex in New Zealand. So it's really cool to have New Zealand commentators counting down to launch.
That's right, especially when you get to 6. Sorry to all of our Kiwi friends. I have an American accent. We can't throw stones. But the sort of thing is, just 3 as he said, 3 weekends ago now, they had their successful launch. And in fact, one of the satellites built here in Canberra between two groups, including our group where I work up at Mount Stromlo Observatory, was on that rocket and was completely successful. And these things happen. And even, obviously the space shuttle had their two terrible disasters, but rockets have accidents. And it's not that it's a short-sighted part of the program, a mistake, anything you missed. These things happen. And yes, you've missed it or it's a mistake or something broke, but the same reason we take our cars to mechanic or airplanes get routine service. These things are complex machines and it literally is rocket science. And it doesn't go according to plan. As you said, this was the 13th launch, and they've had just a huge run of successful ones. So it's always unfortunate to see, especially since last launch they had was delayed from an April window because of the coronavirus shutdown, and so they were really on track, really moving it, and trying to play a bit of catch up. And again, not to say that they were rushing it, they weren't. But it's a hard job.
Well, absolutely, and. There were 7 payloads on board this one. They were going to be sent to separate destinations in low Earth orbit, with 6 out of the 7 serving as Earth observation satellites. So Rocketlabs had christened the mission PIX, or it didn't happen. Unfortunately, it didn't happen.
That's right. And we got pics of it not happening, which was, the unfortunate thing.
I don't think they're going to use that ever again.
No, I think, that's kind of probably a doomed, ill-fated idea. Look, it's, again, one of those things that it is unfortunate. We've talked about the litany of failures that SpaceX has had in their new system and their, pressuring of their tanks and blowing up. It's hard. It takes a lot of time. And even when you think you have it right, little hiccups or snafus happen. And it's a very unfortunate thing for the people who had their satellite payloads on the rock. They lost it. I would say here, one of the things that probably isn't realized is Rocketlabs designed a small rocket on purpose to take small payloads, a few of them. So kind of like a puddle jumper plane, quicker ways into space. So, you take less, but it's cheaper and you could do it more often. And in some ways, if we want to look at a positive here, that has become a positive. If this was an Atlas V or a Falcon Heavy and it had, a huge payload or 60 satellites. Imagine this was a Starlink launch with 60 satellites and all of those were lost. The effects of the disaster, the accident are, dramatically more expensive and far-reaching. The fact that there was only 7 satellites launched instead of say 60 or 50 or $2-3 billion satellites, something like that, limited the scope of the disaster. In some way, showed the beauty of this system, that if something does go wrong, you're limiting the damage. And again, you don't want to plan for this. You don't want to think about it. That's not why you do it. But it just goes to show that even though the impacts of these groups who built these satellites obviously is far-reaching and important and a big setback, the disaster isn't quite like what we'd have in the past. And it just shows the way that this new model is changing for the better space access.
Well, a new Electron rocket is being built every 18 days, and Rocket Lab was aiming to conduct monthly launches throughout the remainder of this year and into next, including the first launch from Launch Complex 2 at Wallops Flight's facility in Virginia, and the launch of a NASA spacecraft to almost halo orbit around the moon using these Electron rockets and Photon satellite bus. So there's plenty of stuff that they're working on, and as you're saying, all these smaller satellites, that fast and rapid access to space, which is something that's starting to become a thing these days. It's more important to get lots of little things up than a few big things. So this launch, or this failure to launch, is going to maybe hurt those plans a little.
That's right. You want a lot more, as you said, you want that faster to access. So once your satellite is ready, you don't want to launch for a ride in 3 months. You want to be able to say, hey, it's like travel, right? You're planning a holiday or going somewhere. If the flight only happens every week or every month, you kind of are in a lull of waiting. But, having those daily options or multiple daily options allows you flexibility. And when you're ready, you're ready. Same with satellites. The more abilities to get them up there. When you're ready, you're ready. You can get where you want. And as you said, quicker. Obviously, this will delay the whole production and launch system. They will do, full investigation with the authorities, both in New Zealand and the U.S., because they also are incorporated in the U.S., as you said, to make sure they're all safe and ready to go. And it also just shows a subtle thing. The reason rockets are launched partially from where they are is when you have these accidents, which if they're going to happen early relative in the launch. If something happens, they crash down and land in the ocean and not over land. So if this would have been launched, say, in Western Australia, on the other side of our continent, and did the same thing, it would have likely came down over an inhabited or at least a land area, something you don't want. So doing it over the ocean does have that, that safety thing. So it's a really all-encompassing way of why and how these things are chosen. But hopefully they figure out the problem, they solve it, and they're on launch pad soon.
Absolutely, Brad. Well, that is our last story of the week for this week. What a week it's been. Hungry black holes, exomoons, more than likely a thing, and of course Rocket Labs failure. Looking forward to putting this all together in our live show on the next edition of a Trekzone Conversation, and looking forward to having you back on Tuesday for another week of Talkin' Science.
Yeah, and I just had the idea, hungry black holes. It's like a new version of hungry hippos.